Well, thanks very much for having me. Join a prestigious alumni of speakers in the past, but let me give my journey. I guess when Mickey gave me the brief, I've seen a lot of these talks and people come and they sort of give you the textbook of, this is what startups, this is what you've got to be and this is what you've got to do and all this sort of stuff. And I thought I would take it a little bit differently because the journey for me has been through a whole range of different domains. So private sector, public sector, multilateral public sector, multilateral private sector, all these different sources of experience. And I think in each of those I've taken an entrepreneurial approach. But I think I've had a few key lessons along the way, and these have formed, I guess, my expectations and my approach. And I thought I'd share that journey with you and outline, well, where were those actual specific lessons that changed me. So I guess, what do we think an entrepreneur is? And I think there's a whole range of expectations in our community. This is one definition. Entrepreneurial leadership is someone who actively identifies opportunities, gain advantage, blah, blah, blah. You could underline a whole lot of these catchphrases and come up with a very technical determination. We often think that an entrepreneur is, out there in the private sector building businesses, but I have seen entrepreneurs in the public sector taking what I think is a different approach. Innovation, moving outside of the norm, the normal processes. So I think what's important isn't that we call ourselves an entrepreneur, although that comes along the way, but that we think about an entrepreneurial process and we bring that to bear in how we approach our work. So I think it is about stepping outside of the norm. So at the start of the talk we were talking about how the stats around people in Silicon Valley having a high proportion of autism, and I think it's a great example and the reasoning is that it enables these people to step outside of the expectations of the people around them and forge new paths. And it's not an easy thing to do, but we don't need to have that. We don't need to have we don't need to think that we are born to have this ability. I think this is just another way of learning about how we approach the things we do. So I thought I'd map out a bit of my journey, and there's two slides here because I think there's two different phases of the journey. So I started I left school on Thursday and started on Monday at BHP as a fitter and turner. Back in the day, you started as a fitter and turner at the Apprentice Training Centre in Mayfield, and I was there for a year and in the tool room doing machining and other stuff. And I tell you what, it gave me an insight. I wasn't made for it. It gave me an insight into the brutality of certain industries and certain technologies, and I mean the design concept of brutalism. Out of that, I decided, well, I wanted to move into new technology areas because I felt that was going to take me closer to the problems which affected most people. And so I started and did engineering at Newcastle University. I was a bit confused. I really was interested in people and theatre and film, and so I was one of these strange engineers. I did engineering and arts, and particularly drama. And now the engineers, the arts lecturers couldn't understand why an engineer was here doing this, but the engineers understood perfectly. It was a great way to meet girls. So completely rational approach. But I guess what came out of that, and I've started to map out the phases of I think I went through in this early stage, and something that happened while I was at BHP, confronted with this, I got into the environmental movement and participated in some of the protests down in Tasmania around the dams that were going on down there. And then I think the whole tension between this creative theatre and technology was all around understanding, I think, the human dimension of technology. And the two sort of came together in my first job when I started to build control systems for controlling energy plants and some of the first renewable energy plants in Australia, and improving the efficiency of coal-fired power stations and monitoring of transport infrastructure. So that's where I went on to my first real job out of uni. Managed to combine that with a master's, where I discovered the wonderful excitement that comes with discovery and innovation. Came out of that and started my first startup, which was actually in partnership with the university through Tunra, which operated more broadly at that time. We commercialised a control system for controlling radio telescopes for tracking geostationary satellites. So it was a control system product, but it gave me my first taste of how maybe business and technology and people can start to come together. But I started to search more and decided to go and do medicine. Soon realised that that was probably a waste of a whole lot of education, so combined the two and ended up diverting for a bunch of years to do a PhD on in the biomedical area. In that case, again, I used technology to solve some key physiological questions around electrophysiology of the heart, and that technology was used to improve the design of implantable defibrillators, with which was what was then an Australian company called Telectronics. I was fortunate that was an amazing job. At one part I stood next to a surgeon who was doing open heart surgery on a young boy who had a congenital defect in his heart, and I provided inputs into placement and design of electrodes. So those sorts of amazing experiences, and also then taking that knowledge and helping to develop and commercialise products. But I started to come back to the big questions and the big challenges that I wanted to make a difference around. And my early sort of experience in environmental areas and renewable energy, and sort of, I haven't put the years on here, right? But this was in the mid-80s, and this here is in the late 90s. And really, the whole question around climate change was starting to become much more significant. And I stopped at one point, and I started to think, well, where really should I be putting my efforts? By this time, I was Director of Studies at UTS in engineering, and Climate Change 1. I had started to do some work in developing countries. I'd started to see firsthand how climate change was impacting immediately on the lives of people. So I left all that behind me. I headed off to work for an energy NGO in West Africa, in Kenya. I also did a lot of work in the Solomons and through the Pacific, in particular Papua New Guinea. Then took up work in Papua New Guinea and the Pacific region with the World Bank, where I mobilised a regional program linking finance with innovation in renewables, targeting micro-enterprises in developing countries. I was then fortunate enough to move over to the UN, where I was their Chief Technical Advisor for renewables for Southern Africa, and then into Cambodia, where I focused around the Mekong sub-region in climate change. So this took me from projects all the way through to policy and financing, and my niche in all this case was always around market development and private sector participation. And I guess I came out of the end of this thinking, wow, you know, the private sector, in particular the small scale technology focused innovators, have got a real place to play in transforming and delivering on our challenge with climate change. I then spent a bit of time consulting and trying to do that more one-on-one, and then at some point I realised, well, I can't just sit here helping other people do this. I've learned so much along the way. I want to do something myself, and out of that came SwitchDin. So that's where we came to. So I guess this characterises my journey. because all the way along I thought I was talking the right language and I thought I was talking to the right people. But over time you start to realise that the language you're speaking isn't always what other people understand. But at some point I think it clicked. And I mean, I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say I'm cracking my way through this right now. I still have to take 5 all the time. But I thought I'd just share a couple of lessons along this journey which really have shaped my approach to entrepreneurialism. And some of these might be surprising, you know, it might be surprising for some people. And the first thing is, I think, you know, we think entrepreneurs need to be the leader, but I think really the key thing is to be prepared to be led. Be prepared to be led by the needs of the people you're trying to help. Now, in my case, a pivotal moment came in a project in Kenya. We'd been brought in by the UN to put in a small hydro for a community. Now, what you'd normally think is, well, the best thing must be we put in the hydro and we run wires to all the houses and we provide them with electricity. But the problem is, the river wasn't that big, there wasn't enough hydro to put full power into all the houses. So we went to the community. What do you want? How should this be? Of course, this is an agricultural community with a few cottage industries here and there. What they really wanted was to value add to the things they were already doing. So this is how this high pressure meeting went. Basically, we had the community leaders. Hang on, I've got we had community leaders and bring everyone together into community meetings. Now, this was a long series of these types of meetings, and we weren't involved because we didn't talk the language we needed to talk. Even if I could speak Bantu, in this case, we wouldn't have understood the issues. So this was the case when we had to give over the whole process and be led to the solution. And I think that really changed my thinking around how we work with technology and look to use technology to solve problems. Another thing which I think has been really important for sustaining me in the journey is to really think carefully about what value you're hoping to bring. What is it you want to change? Is it going to be a critical issue which is going to sustain you long enough through the tribulations you will face? Is it going to be something which is going to continue to inspire you? Now, in the case of renewable energy, this is another example. Again, this is in Tanzania. This was a case where it was another small hydro project, and this was a case where the hydro project was able to deliver very specific benefits to people's livelihoods. So this is what people used to do in order to prepare a meal. You'd stand out in the sun pounding maize to create maize meal, and you'd bake it into a cake. This is what people did to listen to the radio, hook up an old car battery, or to have a bit of extra light. In the meantime, they're spending a third of their income on kerosene and transport and other things, which we take for granted when we have modern communication and modern light. Or trying to work with hand tools to produce furniture to generate income. Or kids taking time out of school to carry water to bring back to the house. So what came away from here was really the renewable energy, distributed energy services, which are close to where you live, can bring about fundamental changes in our local economies. So you might think specifically about individual projects, but you need to have that grander vision. And I guess the lesson that brought me to this realisation came from Bougainville. In Bougainville, there was a crisis for 9 years and the country was blockaded. There was no electricity, there was no fuel for diesel. The PNG Defence Forces stopped anything coming in and out of the island for 9 years. I was involved here in terms of helping some of those isolated communities, both in terms of delivering health services and also in terms of providing renewable energy. And there's this great story of this young electrician who was trained at the mine prior to the conflict, and took that training and was able to manufacture a little hydro turbine. He got an electric motor from a washing machine, and he got an inner rim from a car and welded some plates on it. And that's not exactly the first one he made, but that's one of the ones he made early on. So this is a little homemade hydro turbine, a bit of pipe, water comes down the hill, drives the turbine, turns a generator and makes electricity. That's pretty fantastic. You know, homegrown innovation. Well, innovation, not so much. Homegrown copying, right? What was really the innovation here was the business model. Now, business model is a big term, but what this guy did was, people saw what he'd done and they were inspired. They thought, this is amazing, how can we get one? So what he did was, he set up a training school over here. He set up a training school during the blockade, and he trained other young people to go, men and women, to go out and scavenge and get the bits, build these things and set them up. Now, I had this pivotal moment sitting in a coastal town where the PNG Defence Forces were. Their big diesel gensets had run out of fuel, all the lights went out, and you look up in the hills and there's these little specks of light all around. And it was, to me, it was like this amazing lesson that firstly, technology with an innovative business model can really generate scale, even in the most challenging situations, and can transform lives. Another key lesson, I think, which has been around in the development space for a long time, is that small is beautiful. Now, what we mean here is that there are economies through simplicity in the same way as there are economies through scale. So in the energy sector, this is a paramount lesson. These are two photos from Kenya. This is a large geothermal power station in Kenya, provides about 30% of their electricity. And that's distributed through the country in poles and wires. This is another project we did in Kenya where one of these poles and wires went straight across the village, but no one could afford to connect. It would have taken a transformer and then connecting in the wires and all that stuff, much too expensive for anyone in that village to connect. This project used a very small stream they had and a hydro turbine made by repurposing a water pump. So running the water pump in reverse created electricity. This whole project was tiny. It was 1.5 kilowatts, which is a tiny amount of electricity. But when used wisely, that enables to put 2 lights and a radio socket, which met the immediate priority needs of those households. The whole project cost $2,200 US. The village was financed into it by a microfinance loan and paid it off within 6 months. So other than the technical assistance to make something like this happen, there was no subsidy. It was driven purely by local entrepreneurs who brought about a real change for that community. So for me, the lesson that came out of this is that distributed small services can meet the immediate needs of local people. Okay, so those are some of the key lessons which led me to SwitchDin. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about SwitchDin and what we're doing. The electricity market is changing. So we're moving from a very centralised, large-scale energy service. The market is being disaggregated. In the old days, we had one company that did all these things: generation, transmission, distribution, and retail. But now the market's being split up. So generation is now done by separate people, transmission by separate, distribution, retail, all by separate entities. But the key differentiating thing is that energy only flowed one way. It was the big power station that we had here in Kenya on the left. The big shift that's happening with renewable energy is that we've now got the capabilities for the customer to start to participate in this market. So not only we've got energy flowing down to the customer, we've also got energy flowing back the other way. And this is really changing the way this whole market will work. And battery storage is also a key enabler. And both these things are coming in. So distributed energy resources and storage are coming in at the distribution level and at the customer side. And it's really transforming the shape of this market. The other key driver for change is that the cost of electricity of the centralised infrastructure is escalating. Demand was forecasted to increase, but it's not. It's plateaued, and over some periods in the last few years, it's actually dropped. But the investment continued, and as a consequence now, we're going to pay a lot more for our electricity going into the future than we would have otherwise had to do. I mean, even immediately now, the networks have just won their fight with the regulator, and we're going to see even further increases coming in the near term. Part of the problem, solar has been a great enabler because it delivers electricity at the site that you use it. But solar only happens when the sun shines. So it's been limited in terms of the extent that you can use it in our broader electricity system. Batteries have the potential to change that because batteries give us the ability to store some of that solar energy and use it at the times when we most need it. So it's further empowering the consumer in this marketplace, or it can. But batteries are on a technology trajectory of their own. This is an interesting study looking at the payback period versus the cost of batteries for typical households in Australia. And as you can see, obviously, as the cost comes down, the payback period decreases. Now, of course, one would expect this is going to increase the amount of houses that actually can afford to take them up. And at the end of last year, this is about where we were. You know, really there was an addressable market of 100,000 batteries or so. More recently, we've started to approach this sort of addressable market potential. When we get up to this sort of pricing, the cost of these batteries is going to start to hit grid parity. And then we're expecting the sort of potential in Australia to be almost a third of households. A third of households, by the time we get to this price, could have batteries in them. So how far off is this? Well, more recently Tesla released their new battery, and this is where we are right now. So we are on the verge of a transformation in this energy space. And I think looking back at my lessons, what I'm keen to find out is, well, firstly, how do we empower the consumer in this process? How do we transform the energy sector so that we can derive the value that's going to meet their needs? And that's where SwitchDin comes in. We've built an Internet of Energy solution because the key factor to making these small systems work as a whole is being able to coordinate and help that partnership with the networks. So SwitchDin, we have a little embedded controller unit which we stick in the plant, and that connects the system to the internet, and then through the internet we can coordinate lots of small systems together as if they were one large system. So this is really about bringing the small parts together to bring power through collaboration. And we provide a cloud-based platform to make that possible. We enable smart management of that fleet. And these are the sorts of benefits which we can get. So improving supply security has terrific potential when production is linked to access to electricity. We're also enabling councils and cities to coordinate their infrastructure. We're providing support into the networks. In particular, we're working with Ergon and Energex in their Queensland battery trials. And we're also supporting the operation of microgrids around the country. And this is a case study for one isolated microgrid in Victoria. So At this point in time, we're a team of 7 people. We're working with some of the majors in the space. We've got 96 distributors nationwide for our product, and in 2017 we'll be launching in the US. In particular, in this end of the journey, some of the experiences with SwitchDin, I think, which have been really important, have been around finding the niche. So within the bigger picture, within the vision for what the change we were looking to bring, finding the niche that made sense for SwitchDin to add value. Collaboration. See yourself as part of the bigger picture. Be prepared to open and work with others who are also trying to solve these problems. Be prepared to be led. Your customers can be mentors. Be prepared to be led by what they have to share with you. And be prepared to be real. Many startups will give you the fake it till you make it mantra, and that is a trap. So SwitchDin is now, we're still very much early stage. As you can see, we've gotten to the point where we've been able to validate our product in the marketplace. We've raised seed funding, and we're now in the middle of a Series A capital raise. So a big part of this capital raise will be about driving scale. So this is the journey that I've been through, I guess, mapping out that SwitchDin isn't something that's emerged as out of the blue. It's come as part of a lifelong journey. And I think my approach to entrepreneurialism for this business and others has been founded in the real experiences I've had along the way, as I'm sure it is for you as well. So, thanks.